This is Battleship, and it's one of the most popular board games of all time. Today I'm going to be comparing the 1967 Milton Bradley edition to the 2022 Hasbro edition to see what's changed and what's stayed the same over the course of about 60 years. First off, let's have a look at the Milton Bradley edition. We have a classic two-part box. We've got two happy kids in front having a good time playing the game. I love that he's shouting out, "It's a hit!" and she's shouting out, "G6!" Very fun there. I love the boast here, America's all-time favorite game. Again, you have the classic Milton Bradley stripe across the front here that tells you the objective of the game, how old the intended players are, and how many players should be playing this. Now, an interesting thing is, there's nothing on the back, but who needs to have anything on the back? Battleship is an incredibly simple game, and actually, we're going to go a little bit deeper here. This is how simple, and this is how much I love it. They printed the instructions right on the cover of the box, just on the underside here, and I love that because you're never going to lose the instructions this way. You have more than enough space to store both game boards. This is just a very classic example of a vintage board game box here. I love that it's a two-part. It's made of very sturdy cardboard. It's made it this long and it still looks fantastic. So excellent game box there. Now, Hasbro is making a bit of a departure here with their box. This was a minimalist design that actually was wrapped around these two play sets here. Now, the thing is, they actually boast plastic-free packaging. So, and they did hold to that. When I opened up this box here, on the underside here, the game boards are actually able to clasp together. We'll have a look at that in a moment, but they were clasped together and fit into this box. And underneath here in this little space, they had this box, and this box, it's all cardboard, contained the little plastic ships and pegs necessary for the game. So they didn't come preloaded in the game boards there, but good to their word, there was no additional plastic on this except for tape and glue that fastened it together. That being said, very eye-catching art. Now, this is a lot more dynamic than what you're getting on the 1967 Milton Bradley edition. I will say it was a little odd to me. If you look here, the cannons are, the bore on the cannons is oblong. That's a little weird to me, so I'm not sure what you're shooting there, but the ships all look very futuristic, very fantasy-like. I know that the Navy has some stealth ships that have this kind of exterior here, so I'm not sure how accurate these really are to real world. They look pretty fantasy to me. I think that's what they're going for here. When we flip it over, we see a nice shot of the board. You can see the layout of the board very clearly, the different ships that you get to use. Now, they've changed the classic pegs that we're used to. We'll get into this in a moment, but you can see that they are displaying them quite prominently as well. So again, once you're done, because of how these are built, and we'll have a look at the modern version in a moment, because of how these boards are built, you can recycle and discard this packaging once you've unwrapped the game and put the pieces inside. So actually very ingenious storage solution. So we'll get to that in a moment. First off, let's go to the game boards here. So 1967, we have this folding clamshell design. These are completely self-contained game boards. You get a red and a blue. Players will take their ships and they will place them along these bottom grids here, pretty much at random, however they like. You can shape it in the first letter of your name, whatever you want to do. Players will generally set up the boards. There we go. Players will usually face each other to maintain privacy, set up the boards with their backs to each other. Once they've set up their ships, they take turns guessing coordinates on their map to see if they can hit the other player's respective ships. If they get a miss, they place a white pin. Oh, I'm doing this blind here. There we go. They place a white pin on their map. If they get a hit, they place a red pin on their map, signifying the grid that they know that there's an enemy ship in. Also, the enemy who has been hit will want to mark their own ship. Each ship has little holes here for how many pegs it can take for hits. So once, for instance, this aircraft carrier has taken 5 hits, that battleship is sunk. The objective of the game is to sink all of the enemy players' battleships before they sink yours. So it's an incredibly simplistic game. No wonder it's endured for so long. Going into this, the build quality from 1967 is fantastic. There's no need really to overcomplicate this build. Having this simple, foldable, transportable design that keeps your pegs and your plastic ships safe is wonderful. I was actually surprised that this transparent blue grid that you play on, this version has been very well maintained. This is an excellent example I was fortunate enough to get a hold of. But this plastic is in such good condition. I actually cannot believe that it hasn't started to amber with age. A lot of times when you have plastics that are sold as toys, they'll usually have a flame retardant in the plastic. And with exposure to air and sunlight over time, it'll begin to amber. And so that's why you'll see a lot of these vintage toys and games will have this kind of yellowish color on the surface that really you can only combat by very, very gently using like an abrasive or a polishing material on the surface of the plastic. It's not fun to do. So it's always a treat to get a hold of a vintage piece that's in this level of condition here. But again, no need to overcomplicate the wheel. It's a very simple game board. The fact that the game box here has enough space and more, in fact, there is supposed to be a small cardboard insert that's missing from this that goes between these two game boards to keep them from sliding too much. So there's actually too much space in this board game box, but this was also pretty common size for a lot of board games. What's funny is because it was so common to have board games in this era have a board that folded in half, it would probably be advantageous to take up the same amount of shelf space with a box like this if you were marketing, as opposed to putting it in a smaller box and giving the potential customer the impression that your game system is somehow diminutive or cheaper. So anyway, the original 1967 Battleship, really nice build quality. The fact that it's held up so well. None of the pegs feel like you have to force them into any of the grid spots or the spots on the ship. They all sit very nicely. All of the plastic is, when you get to the pegs, it's kind of a softer plastic. The ships are a little softer. The game board grids themselves, this transparent plastic tends to be a little bit harder, has a more glass-like quality. It's also a little more brittle, and in fact, the blue playboard does have a very small, almost indistinguishable crack right here. So you do have to be careful when you're playing with these. Even with modern sets, anything with translucent plastic, it tends to be a little bit more brittle than the opaque colored plastics. But anyway, no, wonderful game set. It's held up this far and looks gorgeous. So love that 1967 Battleship. Moving on to the 2022. Now the storage solution for this is really nice. I actually like how they have in the front here, all of the ships stow in a separate compartment that have little peg holes for you to fit the ships onto. And I'll have to put a little close-up in here for you to see. There's actually silhouettes of how the ships fit in, so you know how to organize them at the base. Now, I will say, as an adult with chubby fingers and chubby hands, trying to reach in and fish these out, put them in cleanly, can be a little bit frustrating just because of the high plastic lip on these little storage containers here. But I like the fact that it keeps everything stowed and it allows you to count to make sure that you're putting away all of the ships, because this kind of thing is going to be used by younger kids and you want to make sure that it's easy for them to keep track. The pegs are interesting. They've sculpted them so the miss, it's yellow, neon yellow, and it has a little symbol on it like those don't smoking signs, a little circle with a slash there. I don't know if I really like that. The red, conversely, has an inverted triangle with an exclamation point as the hit. Again, you know, it's kind of one of those, I always like to see detail work and I always like to see updates to game designs. These are kind of silly, but it's not anything that I would say is silly enough I'd deduct points for. It's kind of just their attempt to bring Battleship into the modern era. Just like how the ships look nothing like the 1967 ships whatsoever. In fact, the one that takes the place of the aircraft carrier scarce has a flight deck that you could launch a plane off of. So I think these are all kind of just fantasy, science fiction sort of designs here, which is just fine. Battleship does not need to be a realistic game. Moving forward to the rest of the board design, we have this sort of hexagonal board design. Adds a little bit more of a sci-fi look to it. I really do like the little sticker here, the little insert that they put on the translucent plastic so you can see the coordinates very clearly on your strategy map here. I'm surprised they didn't do it here. Instead, it's more of like a frosted plastic along the bottom, but it's still plenty distinguishable, and I mean a far reach better than what we had in 1967. The letters are significantly larger in the modern set, and even just having one of these boards with a highlight's kind of nice. So I will give them, they did do a few things that help with quality of life as far as improvements in being able to really read that grid clearly. So that's nice. Now, here's something that I really enjoy about the modern set. Both playboards have a really nice little clip on the end here to hold them tightly closed. Then what you can do is take them, and you know, this is something I will detract for. I forget, I have a black tablecloth, so when I open this, I don't see it as readily. But the bottom of this game board, the translucent plastic, there's nothing to back on it. There's, oh, I spilled a few of these little guys out of here. We're really testing how well this keeps all the parts together. The translucent plastic underneath this game board just shows the table beneath. Now it's frosted to help hide that, but you're still going to kind of see whatever you have underneath. I'm not sure I like that. I don't know that it really makes a huge difference to the gameplay, but it is kind of something that feels cheap. Now, on the flip side, they're trying to cut down on plastic use. So I'll give them, if you're trying to cut down on plastic use and you're gonna cut a corner, that's a good spot to do it. That's an acceptable spot to do it. Stylistically, I'm not a fan, but it's an acceptable spot to cut costs there without inherently messing with the game. Now, here's the cool thing with storage. These little red carry handles on the side have locks. So once you place these together where they're peg to peg, you can actually lock them. It's really great. You got a little carry handle. This is wonderful for kids. This is wonderful. This makes sure that Battleship, a game that has lots of small parts, is very easy to stow, store, and take with you if you're going on a trip. Love the handles. That's great. Wonderful convenience. The lock is really easy to engage and disengage, but for some reason this doesn't strike me as one that I'm going to have a problem with falling apart. So they've designed this outer marketing packaging that holds everything together for retail to be easily recycled, which that's really nice. I know some people like to have the outer cardboard box, but in this instance, I don't really see how it's necessary in this modern Battleship iteration. One thing I will detract from, and you might be able to see it on camera here, is, and I don't know if this is an effect of the mold or whatnot, but the plastic does not seem to line up very well when you have it closed. It seems very flexible. It feels like there's been some warping since these parts were taken out of the mold. It feels like there's a little bit more margin for error in the manufacture. Now, again, it's not a bad thing. I don't feel there's an adequate lip built into this that I don't feel that I'm in danger of having any of the small parts fall out. The clip on the end is very strong and sturdy, so it is holding together. It's just fit and finish wise, it's not so attractive. So I would appreciate an improvement with that, but kind of a minor gripe. Another sort of minor gripe stylistically is along these handles, there's sort of a pattern that looks like the layering you get when you 3D print a plastic piece. And this is most definitely an injection molded plastic piece, which means that the cast that it's formed in is actually designed to look like that. And I gotta say, if I wanted to 3D print a plastic game, I'd 3D print a plastic game. And if I'm buying one, I would appreciate the fit and finish to look a little bit cleaner there. So that's something that's obviously a stylistic choice in how the mold was designed, that I think that they should probably delete, change, or just make it smooth. Make these handles smooth, and it'll make the whole game feel richer for it. This will feel like a lot more luxurious, because there's some wonderful little greebling along this little hexagonal sort of honeycomb pattern along the Battleship text. I like the logo on the front. I mean, it's unmistakable what you're getting. You got one side that's gray, one side that's navy blue, as opposed to your red blue. But again, you know that it's the two-player Battleship game. It's pretty obvious. So I actually really admire what they've done with the packaging for 2022. So as a modern update, though there are some small details on it, overall, the update for this is great. You're not dealing with having to take care of a cardboard package like this. I mean, yes, I know that many people actually would have discarded this box and in their household just rubber banded these two little play sets together and kept Battleship that way. I think most of the friends that I had growing up who had Battleship, that's how they stored it, was just these two little containers in the closet. You hardly ever saw a box for it. I don't think that was entirely uncommon. So I guess it depends on if you prefer to keep your game boxes, if you like how they look. You know, that's something that when it gets to being vintage, I think it's cool. I appreciate the art, but in this instance, art would be kind of a subjective term for what's what's on the cover here. I mean, this is pretty run-of-the-mill board game kind of marketing. So it's not as wild and crazy or fancy as some of the games that we've seen on this program here. I do think actually this is a little bit more fantastical if we're going to be talking about game art versus this. So this is pretty eye-catching marketing. Lots of fun. As far as game manuals, having it be printed on the underside of the box, I found it really amusing that the modern iteration does include an actual printed, it's again one of these Rand McNally type maps. So in lieu of having a game box that you're going to discard, which that's the one big use of the 1967 edition, is it does have the instructions on the underside of the lid, which, I mean, once you've played Battleship, it's pretty easy to figure out. It's such a common game that most people would pretty much be able to suss it out just by looking at how it's put together. But if you really must, we can certainly, and it is in 2 languages, so it's not that complicated. This is the Spanish side. So it's, but I mean, you've got quite the description here with this fold out. But again, it is nice that they did find a way to include instructions. So in case anybody was wondering about that, yes, there are instructions in the 2022 edition of Battleship. I don't think it's as artistically implemented as when you have the vintage version, the 1967, where the instructions are on the underside of the lid. But again, that's almost like printing out instructions for tic-tac-toe. But not everybody's familiar with the game. Accessibility is a thing. So comparing the modern 2022 Battleship to the 1967, I can't really say that one is better or worse. Honestly, the gameplay experience is going to be the same, whichever one you get. Go for an old one if you really want the feels of having these old red and blue clamshells. But I'm very impressed with Hasbro's packaging, with what they've done with the game boards, the design of the game board, keeping them together like this, and basically understanding how people are going to be using these board games in real life. I would not be worried about dropping this if I was transporting it to game night, whereas, yeah, actually these clip together nicely, but I'd be very nervous about trying to transport these outside of my house without a box to make sure they stay closed. So points to Hasbro. These are easy to take to game night. These are wonderful for kids to be able to take around. I like the style of it. I think it's really pretty. I think the fit and finish could handle just a little bit of fine tuning. But for the price that you're paying for it, I mean, come on, these are pretty affordable these days. So what do you think about all the updates between 1967 and 2022? Take a minute, drop a comment below and let me know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.